Our passage today is Nahum 3, 1 through 7. It's woe to Nineveh. Woe to the bloody city, all full of lies and plunder, no end to the prey. The crack of the whip and rumble of the wheel, galloping horse and bounding chariot, horsemen charging, flashing sword and glittering spear, hosts of slain, heaps of corpses, dead bodies without end. They stumble over the bodies, and all of the countless whorings of the prostitute, graceful and of deadly charms, who betrays nations with her whorings and peoples with her charms. Behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts, and will lift up your skirts over your face, and I will make nations look at your nakedness and kingdoms at your shame. I will throw filth at you and treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle. And all who look at you will shrink from you and say, wasted is Nineveh. Who will grieve for her? Where shall I see comforters for you?
Thank you, Teresa. So, how many of us remember our glory days? I remember my glory days. My glory days were when I was the starting point guard for my 9th grade basketball team at prep, elementary, and junior high school in Laramie, Wyoming. Schools there, they go from kindergarten through 9th grade, and then high school is 10th through 12th. So when I was the starting point guard for the 9th grade team, I was kind of a big deal. And I remember sitting in the locker room down the hallway from the gymnasium, and you could hear the sounds of the 8th grade basketball team playing before our game. You hear the sound of the ball against the floor. You could hear the whistle of the referees. You couldn't really hear a lot of crowd noise because the folks that were there in the crowd, they were looking at their watches. They were looking up at the scoreboard at the time clock because they were waiting for the main event. They were waiting to see me and my 9th grade basketball team play. And sure enough, when it was our time, we would come out on the court to the lights, to the sound of the crowd, and I would always come out last. And as soon as I would come out on the floor, the crowd would start chanting, MVP, MVP. Okay, I'm kidding. That's not true. Do I look like a basketball MVP? I mean, I didn't hit my growth spurt till like my senior year in high school. I was probably like 4'2" at the time. Okay, so that's not true. But here's what is true. We'd come out on the floor, and when the game started, the crowd, our home crowd, would start in on this chant. They would start in on a taunt that was targeted towards whatever hapless foe had the misfortune of being scheduled to play us on that day. And here's the chant that they would direct, this little taunt that they would direct at whoever we were playing. Here's what it goes. It was like this. Hey, you better watch what you do because the prep buckaroos are gonna stomp on you. Hey, you better watch what you do because the prep buckaroos are gonna say it with me. Here we go. Come on. Hey, you better watch what you do because the come on, roos are gonna stomp on you. Louder. Hey, you better watch what you do because the prep buckaroos are, come on, louder. Here we go, come on. Hey, you better watch what you do because the prep buckaroos are gonna stomp on. One more time, here we go. Hey, you better watch what you do because the prep buckaroos are gonna stomp on you. Okay, that was better. We're gonna have to work on that. Today we are continuing in our series on the minor prophets, a series called You Callin short. And the central theme of this series is that the minor prophets, they are often overlooked. And we've seen that they're overlooked because they are the last 12 books of the Old Testament. Many of us don't get there in our reading. We've seen that they're overlooked because they are comparatively very short books, and so we just kind of skip over them. And we've seen a number of other more substantial reasons as to why it is that these books are overlooked. And the book of Nahum is a perfect case in point. I remember, well, I was talking with Betty Painter, who I know she really wanted to be here today. We were talking this past week. Betty, she's been coming to church since about the time of Nahum, actually. And Betty, oh, she and I joke about that all the time, honey. She knows. And so Betty, and so Betty, I asked her, she's like, no, Pastor, in all of my years, I have never heard, I don't think, she says she doesn't remember, a sermon on the book of Nahum. Like, this is a book that is often overlooked, and I don't think it should be. I think if we really understood it, we would not overlook this book. And here's why. Do you want to know why? Because we love a good taunt. Don't we? Don't we love a good taunt? Don't we love a taunt and a celebration in the face of victory? I think about the Denver Nuggets, who recently won their first NBA championship. Can I get a whoop whoop? Come on, Nuggets fans, that's right. There we go, that's right, here we go. That's the spirit. We got to have a little more of that. Okay, so they won their first NBA championship, and Michael Malone, the head coach, he could not resist the opportunity to do some celebratory taunting. Right? He was poking fun at LeBron James, making fun of his potential retirement after the Nuggets swept the Lakers in 4, right? And we love it. We eat this taunting stuff up. Right? We love it in basketball when somebody drives to the hoop, they go up and somebody blocks them. And what do? We love it in football when a cornerback or a defensive back breaks up a pass and it's an interception. And what does he do? He looks right at the receiver. We love that taunt. We love a good taunt. We love the celebratory dances in the end zone after a touchdown. We love taunting. And here's what we need to understand about the book of Nahum. The book of Nahum is the 7th century ancient Near Eastern version of na 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 hey, 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 goodbye. Come on, say it with me. Na 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 na. Yeah. Na 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 na. Hey, 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 goodbye. That was much better. I guess you guys know that one better than the Prep Buckaroos chant. I can't imagine why. Okay. So, like I said, I played for the Prep Buckaroos in 9th grade and in Laramie, Wyoming. And when people were not coming to the Prep elementary and middle school gym to watch me play, they were gathering at the Arena Auditorium to watch the Wyoming Cowboys basketball team. In fact, the school that I went to was affiliated with the Wyoming Cowboys. That's why we were called the Prep Buckaroos, so there's a little association there. And so people would go to the Arena Auditorium to see the University of Wyoming Cowboys play. Now, that's actually not really true either. The Cowboys have not usually been very good. They suffer from the same fate that most smaller schools do. Whenever we would get good, our coach would get a better offer at a bigger name school. He would go there, and then we'd go back to being terrible. So usually, we were not very good. And that's why it is incredibly surprising if you walk into the Arena Auditorium and you look up in the rafters, this is what you'll see. Okay, we got a picture of this here. Okay. What you see there in the middle is a banner hanging down. NCAA National Championship is what it says. The Wyoming Cowboys actually won the basketball national championship in 1943. Can you believe? We're lucky if we make the NCAA tournament. That is an incredible year. We actually won the NCAA tournament in 1943. Now, here's the thing. If you think about that a little bit, okay? Think about what was going on in 1943. Anybody know what's going on in 1943? Yeah, like the biggest global conflict in history, right? So here's my theory about this. World War II is going on, and Wyoming didn't get the memo. That's my theory. They didn't know. So while every other college-aged athlete is off fighting a war, all of a sudden it's really easy for us to win the national championship. In other words, we won because there was a massive power vacuum, right? There was a power vacuum that we were able to take advantage of in order to win. Now, the reason why I mention that is because it's actually something precisely like this that emerged, that allowed the nation of Israel to emerge in the Old Testament as we read about them. So the nation of Israel exists on this strip of land that is just west of the Mediterranean Sea. It's sort of sandwiched between the Mediterranean Sea and then the Arabian desert. It's this small little strip, and it's really right in the middle. It's sort of the crossroads for, throughout ancient history, a bunch of bigger empires. So throughout history, you had like the Hittites to the north, you had the Assyrians and the Babylonians to the east, you had the Egyptians to the south, and throughout most of ancient history, one of these powers had control over the Levant, this strip of land where Israel is, okay? However, at the end of the second millennium BC, there were a number of things happened that caused sort of chaos, sort of a breakdown in the normal power structures. For one thing, the Iron Age emerged in that time, and so there was a technological revolution that sort of brought chaos to the normal power structures. If that sounds familiar, we live in a technological age, and we are aware of how technology can instantly shift sort of where the power is in our world. The same thing happened back then when the Iron Age emerged. In addition to this, at the same time, there were some environmental anomalies that led to some widespread famine throughout the region. And so these major powers, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, they all went through a period of decline, and there was a power vacuum. And it's precisely during this power vacuum that the little nation of Israel was able to emerge. It's in this period that we get the emergence of the monarchy. We get the emergence of Saul and David, and Solomon flourishes precisely during this power vacuum. However, as time went on, as you come to, say, the 8th century BC, now some of these bigger nations are beginning to get back on their feet again. And the first nation to do it was the Assyrians, and they were revitalized as what we now call the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And in the 8th century, they started to migrate, they started to move west towards where Israel was, conquering all kinds of different lands, and they were doing it much faster than any other nation had in the past. And they did this for a number of reasons. One is they had a new innovation in their approach to military, and here's what it was. In the ancient Near East, throughout most of ancient times, if you fought in the military, it was not your full-time job. It was like a side hustle. Okay, you'd fight in the military like today. You might, drive for Uber after you get out of your regular job to pick up a few extra bucks, or maybe you got a YouTube channel that you try to, or you teach some guitar lessons. That's your side hustle to make a few extra bucks in addition to your full-time job. Well, in the ancient Near East, they didn't do that. They joined the military because most of them were farmers, agricultural laborers. And so to add a few bucks, they joined the military, and then the military would go off and they'd do their conquesting. But the problem was, eventually they had to go back. They had to go back to their fields. And so this limited their ability to really expand. In fact, if you were a nation that got conquered by them, you just knew, well, man, if we can just hold out a few months, they're going to have to go back to their fields. But the Assyrians were the first ones to form a full-time army, so that when they came in, they didn't have to go back. And then they also had these incredibly thorough methods of conquering. What they would do is they would come in, and they wouldn't just conquer, they would deport large segments of the population. They would physically remove them from where they were and then relocate them in other parts of their empire. And this was to make sure that they couldn't revolt later on. So, for example, as we've seen throughout this series, the Assyrians came into the northern part of the kingdom of Israel. It was in two parts, remember? You had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And the Assyrian nation came in, and in 722 BC, they captured the capital of Samaria. They conquered the northern kingdom. They deported 27,000 people and resettled them throughout the Assyrian nation. And then what they did is they forced the southern nation to become a vassal state, meaning they didn't conquer them, but for the next 100 years, they just forced them to pay really high taxes so that they wouldn't invade them. As if this wasn't bad enough, the Assyrians were known for being incredibly cruel and ruthless in their military matters. I like to say, if we're going to keep the basketball theme going here, I like to say that the Assyrians were like the old school Detroit Pistons. Anybody? Okay, well, let me explain. Old school Detroit Pistons, this is the late 80s. And if you remember, this is Bill Laimbeer, Dennis Rodman, Isaiah Thomas. And these guys were just dirty. I mean, they were absolutely dirty. I mean, I remember Michael Jordan would drive to the hoop, and he'd end up at the foul line looking like he'd just gotten jumped in a back alley. He was so beat up by the way they have. And that was back when they didn't even have a lot of rules, right? I mean, these days, I mean, if you get called for a flagrant one if you accidentally touch a guy on his man bun. But back then, like they didn't really have a lot of rules. And even the few rules that they had, the Pistons were always breaking. They were just dirty and ruthless. Well, that's what the Assyrians were like. They were the Detroit Pistons of the ancient Near East. So let me give you a little picture, a little vignette to just show you how ruthless they really were. Okay, so what I'm going to show you here, here's a picture. This is from a stone relief that was discovered. Archaeologists found this, and this is of the Assyrian nation. This is actually a picture of the palace in Nineveh, the capital of Nineveh. And what you see there is on the right, I mean, this might be hard for you to see, so I'll just have to explain it if you can't really see it. But what you have here is a picture of, you see a guy drinking from a cup there, over there on the right side up high. That is Ashurbanipal, who was the king of Assyria in the late 7th century. He would have been a contemporary of Nahum himself. And what's going on here is that he's sitting there, and across from him is his wife. And they're sitting it's in the courtyard of the palace, and they're just having dinner and enjoying themselves. And Ashurbanipal is celebrating because this is actually a new wife. This is a new bride. They're newlyweds. And one thing you need to know, though, is that when an Assyrian king gets a wife, he doesn't usually, go on eHarmony. He does not, like go to the bar and pick up on chicks that way or something like that. No, the way the Assyrian king normally gets a new wife is he goes and he conquers a land, kills the king, and then takes the king's wife. And that's exactly what's going on here. Most scholars believe that this is the wife of the king of Elam. The Assyrians went into Elam, they conquered that land, and they killed the king. Now, here's the thing. They actually decapitated him. Now, what's interesting is that the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, he seems to have a soft spot in his heart for his new wife. Probably thinks that maybe she's missing her husband. So guess what he's done? He's just, actually her husband is there with them. It's hard to see, but his head is actually hanging from a tree right over there in the courtyard. So now I guess Ashurbanipal's wife can go see her husband anytime she wants. Apparently, as the story goes, when they went into Elam and conquered that nation and they killed and decapitated the king, they actually took his head, attached it to a chain, put it around the neck of one of the generals, one of the Elamite generals, and then forced him to walk several hundred miles with the head of his king around his neck back to Nineveh. Okay, that's just a taste of how unbelievably ruthless the Assyrian nation was. And so, as you can probably imagine, the Assyrians were hated by everyone. And this hatred of the Assyrian nation, of course, comes through in the book of Nahum. What Nahum is doing here in this short book is he's actually looking ahead to a time when Assyria will fall. And it's in looking at that we see the hatred that emerges here. Look here in chapter 3, verse 19. Again, looking ahead to when they actually fall, he says this: all who hear the news about you clap their hands over you, for upon whom has not come your unceasing evil. He's saying everybody is going to celebrate when you're gone. And then in chapter 3, verse 7, wasted is Nineveh. Who will grieve for her? Where shall I seek comforters for you? Say, no. The Assyrians, they are the nation who goes missing that nobody will miss at all. To steal a line from the chicks. Nobody's going to miss the Assyrians when they're gone because of how ruthless they are. And so what we see here in Nahum is he's not just lamenting, right? He's not just lamenting how ruthless the Assyrians are. He's actually celebrating their imminent downfall. He's celebrating, he's looking ahead to the future, and he sees a day when they will be destroyed. And of course, this is precisely what happened in the year 612 BC. A coalition of Median, Babylonian, and Persian forces conquered the Assyrians, took back, conquered Nineveh, and the Assyrian nation never rose again. And this is, again, what Nahum is prophesying here in chapter 3, verses 4 through 6. And all for the countless whorings of the prostitute, graceful and of deadly charms, who betrays nations with her whorings and peoples with her charms. Behold, I am against you, declares the Lord of hosts, and I will lift up your skirts over your face, and I will make nations look at your nakedness and kingdoms at your shame. I will throw filth at you and treat you with contempt and make you a spectacle. Notice here what God says through Nahum is that he compares the Assyrian nation to a prostitute. And he compares the injustice and the sin of Assyria to that of the lifestyle of a prostitute. And then he says he's going to shame the prostitute, going to expose her nakedness, right? Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because when we looked at the prophet Hosea a few weeks ago, we saw exactly the same language. Except for in that case, what Hosea was doing is he was saying that the nation of Israel, they were the ones who needed God's judgment. That Israel had turned away from God. Israel was promoting injustice. That Israel was the prostitute who needed to be shamed. Well, now it's the same language, but it's being directed towards the Assyrian nation. And he's saying, I'm going to bring you down, and we are going to shame you, and people are going to laugh at you. You see, it's a taunt celebrating the downfall of the nation of Assyria. Okay. So what does this mean for us today? Right? Why should any of us care about the downfall of some ancient Near Eastern nation almost 3,000 years ago? Why should we care about this? And here's what Nahum does. Here's what we see. The answer is found in how the Assyrian nation came to be understood by the people of Israel after their demise. And here's what we discover is throughout the Old Testament is that the word Assyria and the Assyrian nation itself becomes a metaphor for something much bigger. That the evil and the wickedness of Assyria, they were so evil, so wicked, that they came to be associated with evil itself. They became associated with the powers of darkness and death and chaos itself. So an example of this here, in the book of Zechariah, listen here, we'll see the mentioning of Assyria, and actually, similarly, Egypt is also treated the same way. But let me read this for you here, the prophet Zechariah. And here he's talking about a time when the Israelites who have been scattered throughout the ancient Near East will be able to return home. And this is what he says. I will bring them home from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria. And I will bring them to the land of Gilead and to Lebanon, till there is no room for them. He shall pass through the sea of troubles and strike down the waves of the sea, and all the depths of the Nile shall be dried up. And then look at this. The pride of Assyria shall be laid low, and the scepter of Egypt shall depart. Now notice this. He says the pride of Assyria, right? The pride of Assyria shall be laid low. Now what's curious about that is that Zechariah is prophesying 100 years after Assyria is already gone. They're already gone. So what's clear is that Assyria has become a word, a metaphor for whatever powers of darkness, whatever evil, whatever nation that emerges and does injustice, that's Assyria, right? So as one Old Testament scholar puts it, he puts it this way. He says, such oracles of cosmic judgment reflect a nascent reaction to the might of empires that seemed too great for historical redress, so that only God can overcome it. In these mythologized passages, Assyria loses its historical specificity. It is merely a hypostasis of the cosmic chaos that opposed Yahweh's order. Okay, all he's saying here is that this word Assyria becomes to point, it becomes a word that points to something much more than just the Assyrian nation. It points to the powers of darkness and evil and chaos that are at work all over the place. And of course, we see this even more specifically and more profoundly in another passage in the Minor Prophets that we've already looked at. This is in Micah, Micah chapter 5. And this is a passage that we've looked at precisely because it's one of the few passages in the Minor Prophets that many of us actually have some familiarity with. It's a passage that is often read at Christmas time. Let me read it for you. Okay, now muster your troops, O daughter of troops. Siege is laid against us. With a rod they strike the judge of Israel on the cheek. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be their ruler, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient of days. Therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. And the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel. And he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Of course, this is a passage, if it sounds familiar, it's because we find it quoted in the book of Matthew in the New Testament. And again, who is it talking about? It's talking about Jesus. Jesus is the great shepherd. Jesus is the one who is born in Bethlehem. Jesus is the great leader who will come and deliver his people. Now notice something. If we keep reading in Micah, in that same passage, look what it says here. And they shall dwell secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be their peace. And then look at this. When the Assyrian comes into our land and treads in our palaces, then we will raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes of men. They shall shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod at its entrances. And he shall deliver us from the Assyrian when he comes into our land and treads within our border. But again, this is talking about Jesus. So if this is literally talking about the defeat of the Assyrian nation, well, Jesus is 600 years late to the party. Specifically, he's 612 years. We date the fall of Nineveh back from, guess what? The birth of Jesus. So clearly, as the New Testament writers understood, Assyria means something so much more. It points to something so much bigger. Here's what's going on here. Assyria points to the ultimate enemy. Assyria points to sin, sickness, death, the devil, the powers of darkness themselves. You see, evil is redefined. This Messiah who comes out of Bethlehem, when Jesus comes, what does he say? He doesn't come and say he's here to defeat any specific nation. Many of the Israelites wanted that. They wanted him to beat the Romans, to throw off the Romans. But he didn't come to beat the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Persians or the Greeks or the Romans. No, what did he do? He came to defeat the powers of darkness themselves. This is why we see Jesus not casting out the Romans, but casting out evil spirits. Jesus came to defeat our ultimate enemy. And of course, this is precisely what the Apostle Paul says in his first letter to the church in Corinth at the end. Listen to what he says here, talking about what now is happening because of the coming of Jesus. He says this, then comes the end when he delivers the kingdom of God to the Father after destroying every rule and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. And here it is. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. You see, Jesus came to beat the power of sin and death that is at work in all of us. And of course, we see this. The Apostle Paul talks about how all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It's another way of saying that we are all captive to the power of sin and death in our own lives. Nobody is able to evade this. And of course, we see this lived out in the story of the people of Israel in their relationship with Assyria, right? Because again, it starts off when we are first introduced to Assyria in any sort of substantive way in the Bible. They are coming as God's instrument to bring judgment against sinful Israel. That's what we saw earlier on in the prophets. So God is judging the sin of Israel. But then later on, what's going on? Well, now God is judging the sin of Assyria. And that storyline just proves what the Apostle Paul says. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And what we need is a Savior who can defeat death and the powers of darkness themselves. Friends, the heart of the Christian faith is that this is precisely what Jesus has done on the cross and through his resurrection. So you see what Nahum teaches us to do, though, is to not just celebrate this, but to look darkness and evil and death in the face and taunt it. In fact, this, I would suggest, is precisely the way we should approach Halloween as Christians. Do you know what Halloween is? It's an opportunity for us to taunt the devil. It's an opportunity for us to laugh in the face of darkness because we know that Jesus has victory over all of it. Martin Luther says exactly this. He says, the best way to drive out the devil, if he will not yield to texts of Scripture, is to jeer and flout him, for he cannot bear scorn. This actually is sort of the spirit behind the contemporary image that we have of the devil, right? We think of the devil wearing like a red suit with a tail and horns, right? And though that is inspired by biblical imagery, that's not really actually how the Bible describes him. What we discover is that kind of silly picture that we have of the devil emerged in the Middle Ages, and it emerged precisely as a way of mocking him, of taunting him, of celebrating the fact that because of the resurrection of Jesus, we have nothing to fear. Okay. What does this mean for us today? Here's the reality. Because of the gospel, we can look at any challenge that we are facing. Whatever challenges you're facing in your life, at work, at home, in your marriage, whatever challenges you're dealing with physically, spiritually, or someone that you know is dealing with challenges physically or spiritually, we can celebrate the fact that in Jesus, we will ultimately have victory over all of that. The resurrection of Jesus demonstrates that whatever it is, he will see us through it in his time and in his way. We know that we have victory over all of it. Whatever you're dealing with today, I promise you that because of Jesus, when we put our faith in him, I guarantee he will get you through that in his way and in his time. But the resurrection is the celebration of the fact that he has defeated our ultimate enemy. And of course, what does Nahum do? Right? When we look at the gospel in light of the book of Nahum, or read Nahum in light of the gospel, here's what it teaches us. We can look every challenge we are facing. We can look sin, sickness, and even death itself. We can look it in the face. And you know what we can say? Na 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 na, na 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 na, hey, 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 goodbye. Come on, say it with me. Here we go. Na 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 na, na 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 na. Come on. Hey, 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 goodbye. Louder, I can't hear you. Come on. Na 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 na, na 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 na. Keep going. Hey, 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 goodbye. One more time. Here we go. Keep going. Nah. Goodbye to anxiety. Keep going. Goodbye to pain and suffering. Goodbye to sickness and death. Keep going. Come on. Goodbye to every challenge you are facing, everything you're dealing with. We can say this. One more time. Here we go. Let's end strong. Here we go. Ready to go. Na 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 na, na 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 na. Hey, 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 goodbye. We now come to our time of communion. And what is communion? Communion is precisely an opportunity for us to laugh in the face of the powers of darkness. The bread and the cup represent the body and the blood of Christ, pointing to his death, pointing to the reality that he entered into darkness itself. He entered into hell. He entered into sin. He absorbed the weight of all of that. And on the third day, he demonstrated his victory over all of it. Communion is an opportunity to laugh and taunt in the face of evil and sin and death.